Hey there hikers, Adam here. Now I know it's the dead of winter right now, but maybe your New Hampshire 48 4K list is still nagging at you.
Or maybe that winter New Hampshire 48 patch, or God forbid the freaking grid is calling your name.
Either way, it's great to have a place to start your 4K hiking journey. And so these are the 10 easiest New Hampshire 4,000 footers to hike in the winter.
We're starting off on the easiest hike with Mount Tecumseh, which is located near the town of Waterville Valley. The summit is officially 4,003 feet tall and is the shortest mountain on the entire New Hampshire 48 hiking list. And the trail you'll follow is an out and back that is around 4.5 miles long. You're really hitting the easy jackpot with this hike. We're talking the shortest freaking trail, the least amount of elevation gain, a nice gradual slope, and a popular and typically well broken in trail. What more could you be asking for? I don't even think you'll realize that you're hiking a mountain at the start, since that moderate staircase-like incline won't start until after a small viewpoint next to the ski trail. But once it starts, the incline will be nice and consistent until you hit that ridgeline right before the summit. I'd then recommend taking the left trail at the fork for the easiest summit approach. On a clear day, that summit will reward you with honestly a surprisingly nice view for the easiest hike on our list. Next, we have Mount Pierce, our first presidential peak on this list, which is located near Crawford Notch State Park. The summit is 4,310 feet tall, and the trail you'll follow is an out and back that is around 5.8 miles long. This was my very first time hiking Mount Pierce, and I found it quite pleasant, enjoyable, and over before I even knew it. This was clearly due to its shorter distance and tamer incline. I found that the trail could be broken into roughly two sections. The first section starts just after the bridge crossing once you make it to the main Crawford path, and consists of the majority of the moderate incline on the hike. The second half is just after the trail turns left near the junction and is a much flatter incline as you're walking across the mountain towards the summit. On this whole hiking approach, you'll be nicely protected by the trees. That is until a very brief and exposed final short incline to the summit. On a clear day, this short stint above the tree line will give you amazing views towards Mount Eisenhower and the other presidentials. Next, we have Mount Waumbek, which is located near the town of Jefferson and is the northernmost mountain on this list. The summit is officially 4,006 feet tall, and the trail you'll follow is an out and back that is around 7.2 miles long. This was the first ever 4,000 footer I ever personally hiked in the winter, and it was not a bad choice at all. Of note, when you're hiking Waumbek in the winter, there is a separate winter parking lot across the street on Route 2, but that adds an almost negligible amount of distance to the hike, which is otherwise the same as hiking it in the summer. The hike basically can be broken into thirds. The first third at the start has the steepest but still moderate incline. The next third is a bit flatter as you make your way towards Mount Star King summit, which on a clear day offers this hike's main viewpoint. Then the last third is a nice, flat, easy ridgeline walk protected by the trees all the way to Mount Waumbek summit. Honestly, this hike may be a bit straightforward and boring, but that's what makes it easy enough for this spot on the list. The next three summits are unique in that you would preferably tackle them all together on the same hike. First, you have Mount Tom at 4,051 feet tall, then Mount Field at 4,340 feet tall, and lastly Mount Willie at 4,285 feet tall. And all these summits are located right next to Crawford Notch State Park. And as I mentioned, the single out and back trail you'll hopefully follow both up and along the ridgeline is around 9.4 miles long. Now, I can acknowledge that hiking Mount Tom all on its own may be an easier hike than certainly Mount Waumbek and maybe even Mount Pierce. But if your goal is to rack up lots of winter 4K hikes, it only makes sense to tackle all three of these summits at once. Anyways, your first summit here will be Mount Tom. The hike starts off rather flat with a few hopefully frozen stream crossings, with most of the incline occurring after the fork from the Avalon Trail. trail. And then once you hit the ridgeline, it should be pretty smooth sailing the rest of the hike until your final descent. Also, the entire ridgeline and all 3 summits are wooded and should do a great job of blocking the wind and elements your entire hike. From that first trail fork on the ridgeline, a short 0.6-mile stroll will bring you to Mount Tom's boring viewless summit. Don't worry, it will be getting progressively better from here. Our next goal is the summit of Mount Field, which I'm ranking slightly harder than Mount Tom because it's basically a full mile further from the Tom Trail fork to get there. The very moderate incline of the trail sloping up between the 2 summits is obviously easier than the initial hike up Mount Tom, but come on, you have to hike that regardless if you hiked this summit by itself. Once again, we have another tree-covered and viewless summit on Mount Field, but luckily right next to the summit there is a small clearing that offers a nice view towards the Mount Washington Hotel on a clear day. And then our last and hardest summit on this long hike will be Mount Willie, and that is simply because we have to hike a further 1.25 miles past Mount Field summit to get to Willie. And annoyingly, this will involve both a bit of descent off of Mount Field and then an ascent of Mount Willie instead of a nice flat relaxing hike. Additionally, some of the steepest single sections and portions of rock scrambling on this hike are found between these 2 summits. Once you get to Mount Willie, a tiny rock pile in the trees indicates your summit, with of course no view. But maybe another 100 feet further down the trail from the summit is Mount Willie's spectacular viewpoint. This viewpoint will give you jaw-dropping looks at Crawford Notch, Mount Washington, and tons of other peaks in the White Mountains if of course it's a clear day. Now some hikers like to make this hike more of a loop by including the trail towards Mount Avalon summit on your descent, but I found this route to be significantly steeper and more difficult than the main trail, and not in the spirit of this video. For those looking for the absolute easiest path to all 3 of these summits, just hike back down the exact way that we came up, and that will easily keep this hike at its spot here on our list. Next, we have Mount Hale, which is located near the town of Carroll. The summit is 4,054 feet tall, and the trail you'll follow is an out and back that is around 9.6 miles long. This might be the single most annoying summit on this list, and that's all because of the huge difference in the summer versus the winter hiking experience. What was a rather short and super easy hike during the summer more than doubles in hiking distance in the winter time because the Zealand Road is closed. So you have to hike an extra 3 miles one way to get to the actual trailhead. Luckily, the 3-mile roadwalk is effectively completely flat. Then once you get to the actual hiking trail, it still is rather easy with a tame incline to start, then really only increase to a moderate difficulty as the hike goes on. And that's because when the trail could become its steepest, there are actually a nice series of switchbacks that keep things on the easier side. Once you make it to the summit, you'll be surrounded by tons of trees with no view, and the usual cool gigantic rock pile will be almost hidden by snow. Don't worry, you'll have plenty of time on the road walk back to the car to convince yourself that this hike was worth it. Next, we have Mount Musalake, which is located near the town of Woodstock. The summit is 4,802 feet tall, and the trail you'll follow is around 8.4 miles long. I was totally surprised to find this mountain in contention for this list based on my prior hiking experience on a steeper trail in the summertime. But luckily for us all, there are multiple different approaches to Musalake, and this trail may be the easiest one of all. Once again, we're going to have a nice winter road walk to start, but this time it's a much more manageable 0.8 miles that is mostly flat and slightly downhill. Once you cross the starting bridge and begin hiking the actual trail, the first half of your hike will fly by, since it's a mostly flat and easy approach trail towards the mountain. The hike then becomes a bit more moderate once the trail hooks to the right, diagonally ascending up the mountain until the first viewpoint. From here, the trail will actually switch back several times up the steepest terrain while still maintaining an easier difficulty. Once the trail levels out, it's a rather short yet stunningly gorgeous walk above the tree line to the final summit. That summit will give you stunning 360-degree views of the surrounding mountains, including Mount Washington, Franconia Ridge, and even the lakes. Now, just a quick reminder, while the trail is easy and flat near the summit, this hike has the greatest length of trail exposed to the elements above the tree line of any mountain we've seen on the list thus far. Next, we have Mount Jackson, which is located near Crawford Notch State Park and is technically not a presidential peak as many assume. The summit is 4,052 feet tall, and the trail you'll follow is an out and back that is around 4.7 miles long. So I don't really know what happened here. I'm not sure if I just had a bad hiking day or not. This hike is honestly not that long and not that steep, and there's no extra winter road walk to do. But yet, I still found it harder than I expected. Maybe it's because of the minimal snow cover and maximal ice cover on the day of my hike. But even despite those conditions, I thought there were several instances of steep trail and rock scrambling on the way up. Admittedly, those steep instances though are balanced out by the fact that on average the first 2/3 of this hike does have a rather modest slope the rest of the time. And that modest slope will increase slightly on the final third of the hike as we start to approach the summit. But that's when things get a little crazy. I found this final summit push to be surprisingly technical and difficult when it was covered in snow. It was definitely my least favorite part of this hike, though it was brief, and then immediately rewarded me with some magnificent views on the summit. On a clear day, you can easily see Crawford Notch, the whole Pemigewasset Wilderness, lots of southern mountains, and of course a spectacular angle of Mount Washington and the other presidentials. It might be my favorite view on the list thus far, but gosh darn it, when it's time to descend, you immediately have to deal with those freaking rock scrambles again, and that helps earn Jackson its spot here on the list. And now for the hardest, easiest winter 4K to hike, I'm gonna do something quite different. I'm actually going to give you two final mountain choices, each with their own specific winter hiking pros and cons. A choose your own winter hiking adventure seems exciting, right? And this is totally not because I froze my freaking butt off accidentally hiking 11 summits when filming this video instead of 10. Nope, totally implausible. Why are we even talking about it? Let's keep going. Your final hiking choice will be either distance or exposure. For those choosing distance, your final peak is Mount Garfield, which is located near the town of Franconia. The summit is 4,500 feet tall, and the trail you'll follow is an out and back that is around 12 freaking miles long. No two ways about it, this hike is a freaking long slog. Not a terribly difficult one, but a long one nonetheless. The single longest hike on this list by miles. This is of course partially due to the winter parking area that adds an extra 1.2 mile long road walk to even get to the trailhead. But then it's also almost another 2 miles of approach hiking before you honestly even notice any elevation gain or slope to the trail. Luckily, that makes the hiking fairly quick and easy. Once the incline starts, it begins modestly, and then as things get steeper, actually begins to switch back quite a bit. These switchbacks keep things a manageable incline the whole rest of the way to the summit. That is except for an exceptionally steep and brief section just below the summit. That was a bit tricky in the snow, but just after that you break through the trees and you're on the summit. On a clear day, you would have a jaw-dropping view with mountains almost all around you. I was lucky to get a few brief chilly glimpses of Mount Washington and the Franconia Ridge through the gaps in the clouds. Don't linger too long now though, because it's freezing and it's going to be a freaking long hike all the way back. For those choosing exposure, your final peak is Mount Eisenhower, which is located near the town of Carroll. The summit is 4,780 feet tall, and the trail you'll follow is an out and back that is around 8.7 miles long. By exposure on this hike, I'm specifically referring to the raw time that you'll spend hiking above the tree line, directly exposed to any wind and weather. And this hike does have the longest stretch of trail above the tree line of any hike on this entire list by a significant amount. This was also the part that I personally found the most challenging, as I was dealing with significant wind and clouds on the day of my hike. And this is honestly quite common when hiking in the winter. Luckily, the actual trail was not that steep or technical above the tree line, and it allowed me to get back into the trees very quickly. Besides that, this hike also includes over a mile of winter road walking to get to the trailhead, and a moderate and persistent incline almost the whole way to the Alpine zone, which I thought was quite tiresome. But it's all that direct exposure on the summit that will make you shiver thinking about this hike days later, bringing Eisenhower to its spot here on the list.
But hey, that's just my opinion. Now go get hiking.